thing. This is the second part of a series. We did this whatever it was last fall. And it's, again, taking a view of Bohemia. So for those who might not have been here, and for anybody who's been here, just to review what Bohemia in the 1940s was like. Bohemia in the 1940s was really a town that went from Lakeland Avenue to the Connecticut, now Southside Sportsman's Club, Connecticut Club, Sycamore Avenue, and from what is roughly now Sunrise Highway and Veterans Highway. But remember, there was no Long Island Expressway, there was no Veterans Highway. Sunrise Highway ended at what they call the Oakdale Interchange. So if you wanted to go out to Montauk, you traveled on, if you're going south, you went all the way out through all the towns to Montauk Highway. Bohemia was just these streets in between. The 1940 census says that in this area that I mentioned, between Lakeland and Sycamore and the two ends, that there were roughly about 250 homes. And in those 250 homes, there lived 700 people. So that was mainly Bohemia. Of those roughly 700 people, 134 had been born on the other side in what is now the Czech Republic. So you can imagine that Bohemia in those days really was Bohemia. That either there were a fifth of the population was born on the other side, and the rest were children or grandchildren of people who had been born there. So it's that kind of town, a small town, very ethnic kind of existence, similar to those who remember Wcela, which was mostly Hollanders who worked on the bay, did fishing, clamming, oystering, or Lakeland to the north of us, which had a large Hungarian colony with Hungarian Hall, with a street named Louis Kossuth Avenue, who is a hero for the Hungarians, and a wine garden called Little Hungary, which was just before you go over the bridge that goes over the railroad tracks now. It was on the west side of that. So here we were in Bohemia, and last time we showed pictures of the two schools, Catholic school and public school with 4 classrooms and about between 60 and 80 children usually. The Catholic school with 2 classrooms, 4 grades in a classroom with about 65 children, but only about a dozen from Bohemia. Most of the kids in the Catholic school came from Ronkonkoma, Lake Ronkonkoma, or Centereach. We looked at some of the businesses in town. Savenka's General Store, which is now the Locust Avenue Deli, still there. Cerny's Bakery, which was famous, still there, but no longer a bakery. Emmer's Butcher Shop, Winnie Benedict's Lumber Yard, the post office and the ice cream parlor, which are now in the dentist's office on Smithtown Avenue. So we went through a lot of the businesses. We looked at the fire department and the different uniforms and bands over the years. And we're going to begin this evening looking at the 2 churches in town, to begin with those. We'll look at the 2 churches, the Catholic and the Episcopal Church. And those of you who are old-timers will remember that we might have called them Catholic and Episcopal, but most of we called them white or red. The Catholic Church was white, it's kind of yellow now, and the Episcopal Church was kind of a pink color. So you didn't go to the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church, you went to the white church or the red church. I was about 35 before I figured out my religion was not white, but Catholic. This was it's called at that time St. John's on the Plains Episcopal Church. It's where the Orthodox Presbyterian Church is now. It was built in 1886. The pastor, Reverend Prescott from Sayville, had a great interest in the people who settled in Bohemia. He came over here, he had services in homes for a while, and then in 1886 this church was built. It held 30 people on the inside. The stories about the Reverend Prescott say that he was really a marrying pastor, that there were more weddings took place in this little church than in most of the other churches around. He was here for almost into the 1920s. From 1886 to 1920, he was in Sayville and he came here. He got sick and wasn't here for a few years, And then Reverend Joseph Bond from Sale used to come over and come to the church and celebrate religious services here. This church served until, well, into the 1940s. There's the parish house, which is still there. That was used for a while. And then the new church was built in 1952. That church lasted till 1995, when the community discovered they really couldn't support it anymore, and now it's the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. I have no idea what this church looked like on the inside. I never saw it. I never saw any pictures of it. If anyone has any pictures, they certainly would be of interest to us to see what it looked like on the inside. It still exists. It's, if you go onto Walnut Avenue, next to the parish house, the house that's right on the corner of Walnut and Church Street, if you look at the back of the parish house, you'll see this building perpendicular to the front building. You'll see it on the back, so you could see still the size of it as it originally was. This is a picture of the same church. This is an artistic rendering. It looks very fancy with the trees around it and so on. There's St. John's Church, built in 1885, as the sign out in front of it says. The first Catholic services were held, according to the history, were held in the public school in Bohemia at that time. But then, evidently, the Catholics put some religious pictures up on the wall, and those who ran the school didn't like it, so they met out in the woods for a while, and then the pastor from Bayshore, Father Bohemia, in 1885, he had this church built. Those of you who remember the inside know it's very small also. It held 130 people. You see that it had a center aisle. There were rows of pews on each side. Each pew held 4 people, and there were 13 pews, so 104 people in the size of the church. And of course, during the 1940s, there were just 2 masses, probably a total of 100 people attending mass altogether. This is the picture, remember the fire in Holy Week of 2012. And this is what the church looked like after the fire. Later on, I'll show a picture of the interior repaired, if any of you haven't seen it since then. But you can see it was a mess. And you remember, if you were around at the time, that what saved the church was that on the inside it had tin on the walls, on the ceiling, the old style building, and then they stacked stucco on the outside, and it had a metal roof on the outside, so that when the inspectors and the engineers came and looked at the church, they said the church is perfectly fit structurally, even though it had all this damage done to it. That's when the decision was made to repair the church. This is the inside of the church in the 1940s, and the statue in the center, the figure with the white surplice on, the figure in the center, is St. John the Damascene. He's of course a Czech saint, lived in the 14th century. His name is Saint. He came from a town called either Pomok or Nepomuk. And so John the Damascene means John of Nepomuk. He became important in the rule of the kingdom, and then had a falling out with the king over, as they did so many times in those days, over property and who was running what and who was in charge. But the legend that grows up about him is that he was the queen used to go to confession to him. And the king was concerned that, or thought that his wife had a lover. And she asked John, the king asked John if it was true that his wife had a lover, if that's what she said in confession. And John said, of course, I can't break the seal of the confession. Although you can't see it too clearly here, John is most of the time portrayed with his finger to his lips as a sign of silence. Then his body, he was killed, and his body was thrown into the river that flows through Prague. And the legend is that the body was discovered when stars were seen over the place. This is the interior of the of the church, and this is the way it was restored, what, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And the point of the picture is this, that as they restored the new church, they wanted to retain some of the stories of John the Damascene. And since John is connected with the bridge, the idea of this, if you look at it, we're standing, and it looks like the span of a bridge. You see it going down on the other side over us, and it would be coming down on this side. So it's to reflect and to tell the story again of John the Damascene. This picks up the story again. This is the window of the church, the waiting section of the church before you come into the church itself, as you look out onto the plaza and to the school in the background, or the parish center. And you see on the windows, the green and the blue are meant to represent water, the water of the river that John's body was thrown into. As far as social life in Bohemia, there were two places that were centers of social life. One was the CSA Hall, or as it says there, the CSPS Hall, the Czechoslovak Protective Society. The building still stands. It's the apartment house next to the property where Maloney's funeral parlor is on Smithtown Avenue. As you came into the building, there was a large main room for dancing, entertainment, and so on. There was a stage in the front, and behind the stage was a bar room. Upstairs, you can see there were meeting rooms. It was the center of a lot of the social life of the town. There were dances. My father's band played. A lot of other bands played. They would play Czech music for the old timers, American music for the young folks in town, and even Hungarian music for the folks who would come down from Lakeland to the parties. On weekends, sometimes on Sundays, they would show movies in the hall. In the front, they would just drop a curtain, and a man came around with a camera and whatever films there were. I think I remember seeing Tom Sawyer there one time in the movie theater for a dime or a nickel, whatever it was. The only problem with the movies was that there was a stage in the front of this room, and as I said, behind that was the bar and the bar room. And Sunday afternoon was a time for a lot of the men in the town to come together and have their own discussion and a few beers in the back room. So that there was a wall between this back of the stage and the bar room, but it didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. So as you watched the movie, you could also hear what was going on in the back room, which was pretty noisy at times. My grandfather, this was a place he came every Sunday afternoon and spent a couple of hours with the boys fighting about whatever was going on. This is a picture of the inside of the CSA Hall. This is, these ladies are in front of the stage, and the curtain on the stage is down. You can't see it clearly, but the scene on the curtain was a picture of the legendary story of the founding of Prague. You can see that on the top it says rainbow, and to the left you can just about make out where it says UBL, rainbow. The unity, UBL stood for the Unity of Bohemian Ladies. And the Unity of Bohemian Ladies, of course, was this. And you notice that there were lots of folks lots of women in it, and the young women too. It was a large, all the immigrant groups who come to this country formed together to protect their own interests for insurance purposes and so on. The Czechs in 1855 formed the CSPS, the Czechoslovak in English, the Czechoslovak Protective Society in St. Louis, Missouri. And in 1887, a unit was formed in Bohemia. The idea again was you pay dues, and when you pay dues, if let's say a man died who was the head of the family, there would be insurance, there would be a little money for his wife and his children. There would be other kinds of help that could be given. And a lot of it was also to protect the interest. Immigrants have always sometimes been kind of looked down upon by other people, those who were here first. So the immigrants, as they do now, banded together and formed their own societies to kind of protect their own interests, to push ahead, if they could, the interests that they had. This was taken in 1939, and this was an installation into the Czechoslovak Protective Association, the CSA. And you look at the population of the town was about 700, but you got about 60 people who were joining the CSA at that time. It was, again, a great social event, social gathering place also. The CSA hall that we looked at, it was used not only by the CSA, but it was also used by the fire department. It was one of the main halls in town. The fire department, the different clubs, the churches, that was the place where social activities took place. Into the 40s and really into 1955 was the last big kind of celebration like this. But there was a great holding on to the Czech traditions. And this was a Czech day. In 1939, there was a very big Czech day held in Bohemia. Because in those years, there was still a lot of people of Czech background, not just in Bohemia, but in this area. There were a lot of Czechs in Islip, in East Islip, in Sable. So there was a group called the United Czech Societies of Suffolk County. And this was part of a parade in 1939 when they came to the CSA Hall, which had not only the hall, but a big grove next to it where you could have picnics and picnic tables and so on. And the program for the day says there were dances and music and different ways of celebrating the ethnic traditions. This, of course, you recognize today. This is the American Legion Hall. The American Legion was founded, started in 1938. They had no hall. In 1939, they started building the hall, and this hall was built mostly by the men of the American Legion themselves. The property had been donated by the people who owned this property. You recognize this as Hubal Street, and Andover's on the other side. All that property was owned by a family named Tuma. Stanley Tuma lives in Wcela, still a member. It was his father and mother. So they gave this property, and the American Legion themselves, the men of the American Legion, built that hall. It was named after Joseph Kravarik. Kravarik was a common name in town. This was Joseph Kravarik, after whom it's named, who fought in the First World War. He didn't die in the war. He died in 1927, I believe. And I think somebody told me he died in an elevator accident. But I guess he was the first one of the war, after the war, to die, so they named the post after him. Okay, I'm going to stop and put in a different disc, so just hold on a second.